Thank you.
So thank you for your warm opening words. The truth is, I am pretty lacking language to express the profound and overwhelming heartbreak that we're all experiencing. But as our great masters have taught us, that though it may be difficult to speak, it's more difficult to remain silent. There's some power about us coming together, a synergy that gives us strength, that allows us to find deeper resources to deal with such a tragedy. It still remains a tremendous shock. You know, just listening to some of the heartfelt words coming out of the people who survived, family members, father, listening to that father. I mean, it just breaks your heart when he says, please, God, don't take away my amunah, my faith from me. When you hear about the child, literally his last gasps of breath, saying Shema, a prayer, saying, thank you, Abba, thank you, my father. I mean, what can you say? You know, we should never experience anything of this nature, but some of the most powerful and nobility and the dignity of the human condition emerges when you see people under such duress. So here we are, collectively and individually grieving. It's the middle of the Shiva. So I want to begin by saying, Hamokem Yenachem Eschem B'Sech Shar Avlitzin V'Shalayim, the traditional, ancient and timeless consolation and condolence that we say to all those who grieve, that God should fill the space and console you among all the grievers of Zion and Jerusalem. I want to say a prayer for all those that have perished, that their neshamas, after what they've gone through, they went to celebrate the joy and celebration of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, that their souls have a particular sacred place wherever they may be before God, that all those that need a refuah shlema, complete healing, should be complete and speedy healing. And the families, I don't know what to say, but they should gather the strength and gain the power to be able to get through this, become stronger than ever. And this should be the last tragedy in our long exile. We should finally merit to the coming of Mashiach and be reunited with all our loved ones. So this is not a time for speeches. I've given my few words. I've spoken different times. Here I felt it's much more about us coming together and sharing, hearing from you. I will try to respond. But before we get into that, I want to say that there's something that's beyond words. You know, we say a prayer when we can't convey words. And one of the ways of saying a prayer is also through a song. So with your permission and blessing, I would like to sing a song, a heartfelt song that has always been very close to my heart from my youngest years. It always captured somewhat the absurdity of life, but also that deep commitment that no matter what happens, we stand strong. So it's a song without words, but it captures sentiments. And I'll sing the song, and then we will go into hearing from you, each one of you. And please, no holds barred. Everything is allowed to be brought up. I'll try to respond to the best of my ability. But let me begin with this song in the memory and loving memory of those that have moved on in this horrible way, and to their families, and to all of us. Oy hindere na na ya no. Oy hindere na no. Oy hindere na no. Oy hindere na no. Diri oy na Diri oy na no. Oy hindere na no. Diriya yedede na no, oy yedede na no, diriya yedede na no, ya yedede na no, Diriyananai, Diriyananoi, Yayedinanayano, Diriyayayayay, Oyayananai, Nayanayano, Diriyayayayay, Oyayananayananaya, Nano, yo, 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 oh, ya, na, na, ya, na, ya, no, did ya, na, na, did ya, na, no, ya, no, ya, did na, na, ya, no. Oh, ya na na ya na na ya no, ya na ya no, oh ya de na na ya no, de ya na ya no, oh ya de na na ya no, ya na ya no, oh ya de na na ya no, ya na ya no. Oh, ya na na ya na na no. Oh, ya na na ya na na ya no. Oh, ya na ya no. Oh, ya de na na ya no. De oh ya na ya no. Oh, ya de na na ya no. De ya na ya no. Oh, ya de na na ya no. Oh, ya na, ya know. Oh, ya na na, ya know. Oh, ya na na. Ya na ro, ya na, ya na na, ya know. Ya na, ya. Oh, ya na na, ya na, ya know. Ya na ya ay de ya na na no ya ay de na ya no oh ya na ya ya no ya na no Niriya na noya na de na ya no oya na noi Niriya na noya de na ya no. So may our songs and prayers and our coming together and even crying out without answers to these unfathomable questions, may that pierce the heavens alone through all the deepest levels and invoke God's compassion on each one of us, and especially on those that are suffering in such a profound way. And may this evening demonstrate that superhuman power. What we say in the verse, Mika Amchi Yisrael, Goyechad Barat. Look how beautiful a nation that even when they suffer and even when they experience tragedy and loss, they do not lose their connection and commitment to good. It's difficult. It's a tremendous test, but still, this is the ultimate test, because when everything is stripped away, we see what we're really made of. So let us use this evening well in capturing and reflecting that human spirit. And it's an honor to be with you. And with that, let's open the floor and try to speak to each other the best possible way.
But I would like to open up the floor. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone. And I would like to open up the floor to anyone who would like to ask Rabbi Jacobson a question directly. We do have a number of questions that have been typed, but it is nice to have that personal interaction. So would anyone like to ask a question? Or we can start with some of the ones that we received via the chat. Okay. So you can always message me if you do change your mind and you get the courage. I know it can be very challenging. The first question we received here on this chat was, is there a significance to the number 45?
Well, there's always, everything has significance and everything has purpose. But I'll be honest, my knee-jerk reaction is not even to try to analyze it, because I feel it may even somewhat, I don't want to give it any deeper significance than necessary. We cry out to God, why such good people in such circumstances? And I just feel uncomfortable to try to analyze the numbers. I know people have been commenting on the 45 as being connected to the word ma, which is bittul, a sense of humility. But I would rather stay away from trying to right now, at this point, maybe in time when we look back at it and we could sit and talk and discuss it. To me, whether it was 46 or 45 or 44 or 43, it's an equal tragedy. And my sentiment and feeling. At the same time, as I said, everything I'm sure has deeper purpose, but I would rather not go into that right here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson. We would also like to ask, someone asked a question, is it okay to blame the authorities for poor crowd control rather than simply calling it the will of Hashem?
I don't want to sound like a repeat. I think everything has its time. I really, even though I'm sitting here in New York and each of you in your place, I really feel I'm sitting in a shiva call by some of the families that have lost their children, that have lost parents, have lost a father, lost a brother or another relative. And when you're sitting in that type of state, I think everything has its time. I don't want to do finger pointing. Of course, there's a necessity to analyze and to figure out what could have been done naturally for crowd control, as you said. Meron has hundreds of thousands of people, and what mistakes were made. Of course, there's a time for that. But at this point, I think our focus should be really is about giving each other strength and going through it. And I also want to stay away from finger pointing and judgmentalism. Like, I'm not sure if anyone's going to ask this question. The question could also be, should hundreds of thousands of people come together in this fashion? This is a custom that's been going on for years upon years. And with God's help, thank God, nothing like this ever happened. Now that it has, I'm sure it's going to be reviewed by the authorities and by the people who attend these pilgrimages and their organizers and the rabbis to make sure that everything is as secure as possible. At the end of the day, we can look at those that are responsible. I don't want to blame God completely, but at the end of the day, God does decide who lives and who does not. And that's something that we will never understand, those mysteries. So I think it's a combination. It's a partnership. We have to do everything possible in a natural way to keep safe, just like we go to a doctor, just like we take other measures. At the same time, God is a partner, and we hope that God blesses us and makes sure to keep us safe at the same time. So I think we need to combine the two, and each thing in its own particular time to address. I am sure, rest assured, this is going to be investigated and looked at, and I'm sure there'll be finger pointing, but that we have to stay away from that. We need to make sure going into the future, everything is secure. But right now we're sitting literally in open graves and open and wounded hearts. So I think I'll try to focus more of that for this moment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Rabbi Jacobson. I would like Rosalie Weisfeld, I'm sorry. She would like to ask you a question. So Rosalie, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and let me know if you receive that. Okay.
Thank you so much, Chaya, and thank you so much, Rabbi Jacobson, for giving us this opportunity to speak with you directly and to have a conversation and to gain some understanding. I was able to watch the Levaya of Donnie Morris and come to know him through his father, his Rosh Yeshiva, the rabbi, his aunt, brother, who spoke so lovingly about him. And even though I didn't know him before, I feel like I came to know him. And I read a beautiful writing from the mother of Ozzy Colte, Sukolte, and I, as tragic as it was, it there was so much amuna, there was so much faith in every word that every person spoke, that it helped me to gain some peace, because is when one neshama rises to the heaven, even if it wasn't somebody that I knew directly, it's still somebody I knew, because we all share so much as a Jew. So when one is hurt, or 45 or leave this world, their neshamas, their presence, their lives still affect all of us. And I just wanted to express that, and to ask you though, if there, you know, what can I do to help? What can I to say to him? Chaya, thank you so much for leading us earlier. But you know, there's the question of why and how did it happen, but also the sense of I grab my faith even stronger, because there has to be a reason. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rosalie.
Well, you know, we share the same feelings that you just expressed. It brings us to tears. As I said earlier, it shatters our hearts. And honestly, when we say we don't have answers, that's not a sign of weakness or a sign of surrender or escapism. It's actually respecting the very awesome mystery of it all. You know, there was a Rebbe, I think it was the Belzer Rebbe, after the Holocaust. He said the following words: even if God were to come to me and offer me an explanation, an answer to why 6 million innocent Jews, 1.5 million innocent children were so mercilessly killed, I wouldn't want to hear an answer. You see, reason, logic, rationale, all the things we so often depend upon and even worship are really very limited tools. They're good for mathematical equations. They're good for figuring out how to build businesses. They're good perhaps for planning your life in regular circumstances. But when something so irregular happens, the reason we don't have answers is not because we need to dig deeper, is because it's an experience that the mind simply cannot wrap its head around. So yes, we can ask why, and we can try to find a reason, but there's no reason that will ever justify this. Now, even God, when the 10 martyrs were being brutally killed, and Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, and the angels came crying to God and said, is this Torah and this is its reward? They were ripping Rabbi Akiva's flesh with metal combs. It was the most horrendous type of murder of the greatest people of the time, the greatest. Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol. We say the prayer in Eila Esther, these we shall remember on Yom Kippur. And they said, is this Torah and this is its reward? And God responds, quiet, be silent. This is what arose in my will or my thought. And this statement is analyzed and overanalyzed again and again. Now, why didn't God explain? Why couldn't he explain it? If he had a reason, let him explain it. Would an explanation have satisfied anyone? So I don't have an answer of why this tragedy took place, just like I don't have an answer why the Holocaust took place and why any injustice happens in this world to any person throughout history and in our times, for any one of our personal tragedies. But at the same time, I also don't have an answer of why we were born and why we celebrate and have joy. You know, it's the mystery of existence itself. God created in a world where there's a possibility for tremendous joy and celebration, but also a possibility for tremendous pain and suffering and loss. Only God can really know what that deeper plan is. But one thing we know for sure, that no matter what happens to us, it does not define who we are. It's what happened. It can break us. It can be overwhelming, but we come out stronger, and we will never cease to be committed to our goodness and kindness. Now you'll say, why not? You know, we can get angry at God and say, enough is enough. You know, what do you want of your people? Good people, trying their best. Why did they go to Meron in the first place? To celebrate a mitzvah, to celebrate the request of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. So yes, of course, there are many ways to explain why we'd be angry. But the healthy approach is we don't want this to destroy us. We want to take the grief and channel it into something positive. This is why we're coming together. I really don't have more words. What can I say? That's why I sung the song. I don't have words. I just say, like one of the Rebbes once said, I don't have answers for you, he told his disciple who suffered a tragedy. I don't have answers for you, but I can cry with you. And there's something about crying together. There's something, the strength that we gain. Listening, as I said again, to what these people are saying as they're sitting shiva for their own families is a tremendous source of strength. So my summation of what I just said is this. We don't know why, but we try to figure out what we can do about it, how we become better people, and we completely believe that we will prevail. We will prevail, and the world will become a better place, and a world that will ultimately eradicate, that all tragedy and all grief and all loss and death and disease will be eradicated. We firmly believe that. I have more to say on this, but let's take some more questions, and I'll try to share. I want to share a very interesting anecdote story that happened a number of years ago, but I'll do that in the next segment as we continue on here.
Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson. We do have another question from Judy K. Judy, if you're available, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself now. Okay, let's see. Do you see? Okay.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. I had difficulty.
That's okay, we can hear you.
First of all, I want to say to Rabbi Jacobson, we love your Omer app, Counting the Omer. It's just been remarkable how much it touches us. A bunch of us women get together every morning and go over the app together. And I really appreciate that. And I appreciate this gathering because the wisdom that we get from Rabbi Jacobson all the time, it gives strength at a time when people want to say why and why do the people go there? Well, I've been to Meron a few times and there's very good reason. There's no place else in the world where 500,000 people gather and there's food and drink and nobody is selling you anything. It's all laid out because it's a place of Jewish unity. And all streams, religious, not religious, all kinds of Jews are there. We get to see primarily the videos of the more observant Jewish people with such fervor celebrating. And I've been there a few times myself, and each time came away with how different it is than any place else in the world where they'd be selling you everything
Thank you, Judy. I'm just going to say I'm so sorry to interrupt you because you're right and you're bringing up some really beautiful points. But just in the interest of time, I apologize.
Okay.
Please forgive me if you have a direct
That's okay.
question. Okay, because what you're saying is really important and beautiful. But if you have a direct question to ask, thank you so much.
So my direct question was already answered, and that is there is no why. But it is a day of unity, and this could, I'm thinking that this could be footsteps of Mashiach, God bringing us a little closer by some tragedy. So that's it, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you for your words. Very touching. Thank you.
Okay. And we actually have a number of questions that came in that a lot of people are asking variants of the question of why. So please forgive me if you've asked a similar question, why did children have to be among the victims? I think Rabbi Jacobson did cover that, that's really not our place to ask. But one anonymous person wanted to know, what can we do for their memories, for the people that are not here with us?
Well, I want to still elaborate on the why as well and what we can do. So let me address both those. I don't want to correct you, but I wouldn't use the word "it's not our place." The experience of such grief and tragedy does not fit into the parameters of reasoning. So it's not respectful. It's like if someone asked you, let's talk on the positive side. Someone said, why are you in love? Explain to me, why are you in love? Can you give a good rational reason for love? Yes, rationale, the mind, our cognitive faculties can appreciate love, can respect it, but it's really beyond the capacity of pure logic. I don't mean that it's irrational or illogical, but it's not just logical. Love, when you love your child, you love your spouse, you love people, you love them beyond just a reasonable reason, meaning, you know what, if they do so and so, I love them, and if not, it's not conditional because the commitment is completely there, no matter what. Whether it makes sense or doesn't make sense, love is always in place. Sadly, on the other end of the spectrum, the same is with death and grief and sadness. It's just not in the parameters, not in the structure of reason. So the only thing we can do is face God face to face and say to God, you know what? You created a world where you said that when we behave in good ways, we'll have good lives. But now I see good people suffer. It seems unreasonable suffering. It doesn't seem justifiable in any way. So you're now facing God in a way, place that's beyond the structures of reason and all the other equations that define so much of our lives. It's actually a very sacred place to be, but it's one that nobody ever wants to go there because you're dealing with God that's beyond the regular structures of things. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I want to share the following, and then I'll respond to the question of what we can do as a continuation. I've shared this a number of times, but I think it's very powerful. I've asked this question to many Holocaust survivors, and including a friend of my father's and then became a friend of mine, Elie Wiesel. And the question I asked was, is it true that when the Jews marched to the gas chambers, they would often be heard singing a song called Ani Mamin, I believe with complete faith in the coming of Mashiach. And though he may tarry, he may be delayed, I still believe. Is it true? So he answered, Mr. Wiesel, Elie Wiesel said to me, he wasn't near the barracks were kept at a distance from the gas chambers, even though everyone knew what was happening. But he said very often, however, in the barracks, you would hear in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, in the middle of the night, a prayer, a Shema Yisrael, sometimes a Kaddish, sometimes one song, and sometimes this song of I believe with complete faith. So I said, with all respect, I'm an American boy. I didn't go through anything close to that. But I wonder, and I am asking as a skeptic, so to speak, isn't it sound somewhat absurd that a time, the darkest time in Jewish history, where God literally was completely concealed, allowed his people to be massacred in such a way, an inhumane way, shouldn't the Jews have been justified to be really upset and angry at God? And instead they're singing his praises and saying Kaddish and hallowing his holy name? Doesn't it seem like, it doesn't seem normal? So the response I heard from him and from others, that first of all, it's true, Jews are not always that normal. Okay, But beyond that, the statement was, it wasn't denial. They knew where they were going to their deaths and the most horrible way. It wasn't escapism. It wasn't fantasy. It was actually the most powerful declaration that a Jew can make, that a human being can make. And that is that you may take our bodies, but you can't take our souls. You may take our lives, but you can't take our beliefs and our faith. And if it won't be us, it will be our children. And if it won't be our children, it'll be our grandchildren. But we will prevail. Our belief in goodness and our belief in God and our belief in values will not be destroyed because you are killing us. We will prevail. So fast forward. Yes, 1/3 of our people were taken from us. 18 million Jews, 6 million, 1.5 million children, as I mentioned. But despite all the predictions and obituaries written, after 1945, the Jewish people did not die. Many of them were taken. A broken people. If you went by statistics, there were predictions that the Jews would not no longer exist by the year 1990. And it made sense. 1/3 of the people were killed. Many of them leaders. Entire communities, cities were wiped out. The Jews that remained were broken refugees, had no home, nobody wanted them. Israel was not yet established as a state. So you'd make that prediction, but Jews never went by statistics. They went by something that transcends statistics. It's a supernatural and superhuman belief in the very goodness of things. And what happened? Grandchildren and children of the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, changed their names. They hide their identities. They don't want anyone to know who their grandfathers are or grandmothers. And the Jews, their children and grandchildren, built communities, both in Europe and the United States, in Israel and all over the world, and are proud. And what do? They would not only do we remember those 6 million, we've built institutions in their names. So this is this better than the answer why it happened? I don't know why it happened, but I know what it resulted in. As the verse says in the book of Exodus, Shmois, Kashayana Esam, as the Jews were afflicted, Ken Yirba v'Chen Yifritz, in direct proportion, they thrived and they flourished. So this brings me to the answer to the initial question. What do we do? For every person who was taken, not only do we remember them and remember their names, and we never forget who they are, we now have to fill their shoes. What would have happened to each one of these 45, the trajectory of their lives that was so cut off prematurely? They would have built families, some of them. Some of them already had families. They would have gone on to do great deeds and good deeds and mitzvahs. So it's not enough just to remember them. We now have to double and triple our good deeds to fill the void. Hamokam Yenachem Eschem, I mentioned. There's a space missing in their families, but there's a space missing in the world. So our job is to fill the shoes, fill and be their arms and legs, since we are blessed with life and God has given us life. What are we going to do? Right now, we make the determination this evening and tomorrow, and frankly, it's been done. Look at the thousands, if hundreds of thousands, or even millions of good deeds and charity and unity that is coming out of this. Now, no, it's not a justification. We all wish it wouldn't have happened, but nothing less than doubling and tripling. For every tragedy, we have to do so much more in joy and in celebration and in unity. And unity is a big one. Once and for all, let this be a wake-up call to create tremendous, unprecedented wave of Avos Yisrael and Achdus Yisrael, love, unconditional love and unity. That would be a tremendous tribute to these individuals and to all of us. And you can go on the list. I'll give more suggestions as this evening goes on, but we can continue to do whatever is possible. Each one of us in our own way, be creative, but initiate. Don't wait. See it's hurting you. The hurt should be a catalyst to doing something positive, and maybe more than one thing positive. And I'll finally say, this is the best lesson to our children. We will remember this year, 2021. Tufshin Pei Aleph, 5781, as we will remember 5780 this past year. And our children are watching us. How do we respond to tragedy? Yes, we cry out. We are in collective mourning, individual mourning, but we also have taken this and become far better people. There's no better lesson you can leave and teach your children by example what happens when a Jew is in crisis, when a tragedy strikes like this. And the growth and the beauty that will come out of it, and the good deeds that will come out of it, that will last forever. The pain will subside, but the growth will be forever, and we will prevail. And hopefully as quickly as possible, that we don't have to wait any longer.
Amen. Thank you so much, Rabbi Jacobson. Another anonymous person asks, how do I still believe in the power of Tehillim and prayer when so much has been said and the outcome does not change? They also wrote that Hashem has his master plan. So, I mean, there's an understanding that this is a painful thing to grapple with.
Yeah. Well, I just, what comes to mind is, if you may all remember Mrs. Waxman in Israel. It was a number of years ago, I'm not sure how, maybe 20 years ago. It was her son that was captured by terrorists. And of course, Israel does not negotiate with terrorists. So the demands were great. They wanted to negotiate. Meanwhile, the Israeli intelligence found out where he's hiding, where they have him hidden. All of Israel was praying and saying Tehillim, led by Mrs. Waxman, saying Tehillim and praying for him. The Israeli army did find out where he was, but they came a minute late. When they stormed in to the hiding place where the terrorists were hiding this young man, they killed him before the Israelis could save him. So, of course, it was a tremendous mourning and grief in the entire country. But some Israeli journalists, I guess a little more abrasive than appropriate, asked Mrs. Waxman and said, what happened with all the prayers, with all the Tehillim, the Psalms? Now, everybody was saying Psalms, and look what happened. Your son was not saved. And this was, I mean, how anyone could ask a grieving mother that question is another story. But this is what she responded. Listen to this Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God. This is what she said. She said, yes, calmly, composed. She said, yes, we prayed. We said Psalms, and God heard them all. He hears all prayers. And he listened well, and his response was no. That's how she replied. And we accept that. Now, this was not an act of, she's a grieving mother. She cried well over her son. But the demonstration of such aplomb, of such dignity, the fact of the matter is, we're told our prayers do have impact. God listens to every prayer, as we understand that, and God hears it well. How God responds is not always the way we understand. Sometimes he'll respond exactly as we expected and what we wanted. Great. But sometimes his response may be not the way we imagined. And sometimes the response is seen later, over the time, over years, why God responded his way. Remember, faith is not some childish crutch where you just say, it's all in God's hands, I throw up my arms, we're nobodies. That's not true. Faith is not passive. Faith is aggressive, actually. The greatest men and women of faith, Abraham, Sarah, Moshe Rabbeinu, the list goes on. They challenged God on every step. When when Pharaoh was bathing in the blood of Jewish children, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say, oh, Pharaoh's about, he blamed God. He pointed an accusing finger at God and says, why are you doing evil to these people? And when even this wicked city of Sodom was being destroyed, Avram is arguing with God, Hashefet Kalaj, the judge of the entire world, is not doing justice. Faith is challenging God, demanding justice, and saying to God, you're the one that promised us that goodness will prevail. We're calling upon you. We invoke God's very verses in the Torah to challenge God. But at the same time, faith has another side to it. After we've done everything we can possibly do, whether it's through prayers or efforts or psalms, everything. At the end of the day, there's one God, and God decides. And we accept that decision, even if it's not the way we expected it, even though we cried and argued with God. That's the paradox of faith. It goes, both come together. It doesn't always sound rational, but it does come together. And that's where really healthy people grow, because they absolutely fight tooth and nail, even with God. But then they understand that God is ultimately the final say, and God ultimately is utter goodness, even though we may not understand it. And we will continue to argue and fight until we prevail, like Moshe Rabbeinu did, 80 days arguing with God to forgive the Jewish people. And for that, we have the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur. So practically speaking, what we need to do is we need to act, increase in goodness and kindness as much as possible, as I've mentioned before, even more than the negative that has happened around us.
Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson. We would just like to again remind people that if you do want to ask your question directly to Rabbi Jacobson, the floor is still yours. We have a number of questions to still work through, but feel free. If you would like to take the opportunity, you can raise your hand or direct message me if you want to ask your question on video. Otherwise, we would like to address the question. Should I feel selfish for thinking that my relatives who were in Meron, who were spared when other people are mourning, meaning how can I relate? How can I accept this? How do I be so grateful to Hashem, but yet also deal with the tremendous tragedy as well? So how do I respond when other people are mourning, but yet this man in particular was feeling so grateful and relieved?
The Talmud tells us, and I believe one of the questioners pointed this out, we are all one organism, like one body. There's a right arm, a left arm, different organs, different limbs, different systems. And one complete body is, every part of the body is interdependent on the others. So if God forbid, one part of the body, even a small toenail, is hurting, it hurts the entire body. But at the same time, we obviously want to strengthen the parts of the body that are not hurting. So the fact that, for example, a person has, let's say, God forbid, a little pain in their arm, but their other arm is functioning fully well, you celebrate. And as a matter of fact, the healthy part of the body will help strengthen the weaker parts. So when someone is ripped from us, from our midst, and here we have 45 holy human beings, men, children, teenagers, ripped from us, our body is aching. Whether we feel it completely or not, it depends on each person's sensitivity. But the fact of the matter is, parts of our body were amputated from us. But there are other parts that are strong and need to be strong, because they help heal the parts that were weakened or torn from us. So we need to always remember, this is not a selfish experience. I was saved, thank God, and at least I'm around. No, you're saving the fact that God blessed you and saved your life. Let's say you were in those circumstances. I know some people who were there, and yes, they came out intact. So you have to look at it. This is a blessing God gave you, to always remember, not just I saved my skin. Now that in that place, what can I do to strengthen our collective body? I heard in one of the videos, one of the people sitting Shiva for, I think, a child, said that somebody came to see him, somebody who was there in the crowd. And he says, I felt that individual came to ask me for forgiveness, because clearly he was very close to his child and may have even stepped on him. And he felt very guilty about it. And the father was actually very touched that he came, But I look at it this way. He came not just out of guilt, but it's also out of saying, I'm with you. I survived for whatever reason, and I'm with you. And we're all part of one entity here. And that's really the way we should look at this whole thing. It's not just, oh, thank God we got saved and we're out of here. No. Anyone, all of us, even those that were not in Meron, we're part of this collective body. We need to strengthen ourselves in the sense of strengthening our commitment to everything that's good, to mitzvahs, to Torah, to prayer. And that also strengthens those that have been weakened here, family members, and in many ways also compensates, in some way fills the gap and the vacuum left by those that were taken.
Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson. Now we have a question from Jane and Mark. I will ask you to unmute yourselves. Let me just add the pin here so you can be on the screen. And you should be able to unmute yourselves now if you see the reminder. Okay, you're unmuted.
I guess the question is, for one thing, I just wanted to thank the rabbi. Jane and I had done counted the Omer intermittently before this, but about 4 years ago we started, and this year we've done it completely. And I wanted to ask you, do you see tragedy and these terrible things that happen as some way freeing us from Mitzrayim, from the narrow places, and letting us see that we are all together, that things are much broader? And, I know you can say it much better than I can. And I just want to again thank you, Rabbi. This is so wonderful that you're doing this.
Thank you. Yes, look, it's hard to deny that we are right now in a period of actually mourning in general. Before this Meron tragedy, the days between Passover and Shavuos is counting the Omer. And one of the reasons we don't celebrate weddings and play music and do other leisurely things is because we're remembering the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva that perished in this period due to them not respecting one another. So it's unfortunately the same period of mourning, and now we have something really to mourn about that's in our own time, sadly, terribly sadly. So what you're just referring to, I think, is a good way to put things into context. When the Jews left Egypt, which was a few weeks ago, already 5 weeks ago, we celebrated the Yetzias Mitzrayim and the Exodus from Egypt. Then we count 49 days. That leads us into Shavuos, the receiving of the Torah. The 49 days are seen as 49 days of preparation, refining ourselves. They did not respect one another. We learn to respect one another more than ever. We refine our characteristics, our personalities. We try to improve who we are. We look introspectively into each aspect of our personalities. The chesed aspect, the love, how we discipline, which is the 49 days of refinement. And now that we have this unwanted, to put it mildly, this terrible catastrophe, now it really has woken us up. So the fact that we are in these 49 days of refinement, preparing to receive the mandate of God at Sinai, coming from the exodus from Egypt, as you pointed out, Mitzrayim, Egypt, refers to all forms of constraints and limitations and inhibitions and fears. And yes, including the pain that we suffer and the grief of all loss and tragedy. So the 49 days that we are in right now are really meant to build us up, to rebuild our lives. And now, as I said, this has all taken on a whole new acute level due to what's happened last Thursday night in Meron in Eretz Yisrael. So as Maimonides says in a very powerful and succinct way, right, the beginning of the laws of fasting, he says when a catastrophe, a disaster strikes a community, it would be cruel and insensitive to see it as just an accident. We have to see it as a wake-up call, not a wake-up call to point fingers and blame others, but to look at ourselves, to be more introspective, and not as blaming ourselves either for what happened, but it meant to be that we need to learn from every experience. So it's not a direct tit for tat. Okay, we didn't do this, that's why this happened. But rather, it should make us more sensitive human beings. And this is very much what we're doing here. And I hope everywhere in the world, people coming together in different ways. The goal is to become more sensitive, more kind, more compassionate, more deliberate, and to, yes, not take for granted so many of our gifts and look at ourselves. I mean, that would be the minimum to honor this great tragedy. So this period of time really has all those lessons within us, leaving the constraints, leaving the fears, leaving the Mitzrayim, reaching a place of Sinai and the revelation. And in between is our work on ourselves, introspection, soul searching, refinement, character development, and everything it takes to become better human beings, and how you speak to another, and controlling our anger, controlling our other vices, and allowing our virtue to become more powerful than our negatives.
Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson. Now, this was a question that was submitted earlier today by Chana. So Chana says, Dear Rabbi Jacobson, thank you for having this special program to address the Meron tragedy. On a daily basis, I work on my emunah and betachon. I study and restudy in good hands the collection of the Rebbe's letters and talks on the topic. I frequently study Shar HaBetachon of Chovos HaLevavos and other books on betachon. I do tend to get anxious, yet this week I'm having more anxiety symptoms than usual. Getting nauseous easily, having nightmares, and just having those feelings of sadness and malaise. And so she continues that she's trying to direct her energies in a constructive way and do things in memories of the Kedoshim. She's davening, and she's davening for healing for everyone. And she's doing all these things that she feels the Torah, or she's learned, or that the Torah is recommending to her, so to speak. So she says, my brain knows the best answers the Torah gives us, but the feelings aren't going away as fast as I'd like. She says, it sounds a little crazy. I know Hashem gave us this tragedy, and here I am trying to control by what's by definition out of my control. But the bottom line is, she's asking, is there anything I can do to speed up the grieving and healing process? And it's similar to another question that was asked this evening, with a person just feeling that they're unable to move on, and they're just really having if they simply can't move on, they can't stop thinking about how horrible it all was. So what, if you can shed some insight, we would love to hear. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a very, all the questions have been excellent, but this is a question that's so universal about any challenge we have when we feel paralyzed emotionally, psychologically. And as much as we know we should be moving on or being able to free ourselves, we just get completely debilitated and demoralized. So I will just share some of, I don't want to call it trade secrets, but some tips that are based on Torah thinking that's time tested, goes back thousands of years. Remember, we're a people that individually and collectively have suffered greatly. So what gave the Jews the fortitude? How did they have that resilience to be able to make it through? First Egypt, and then the destruction of the first temple and the second temple and everything in between, over and under. And then the persecutions through the Crusaders, the Inquisition, the pogroms, and ultimately the Holocaust. And of course, individually. And this is something I deal with and work with a lot, because I really sincerely believe what I'm going to share now, at least briefly, is very much a true formula that all people who suffer in any way, seeking recovery from trauma, from abuse, can learn from the Jewish people who are here almost 4,000 years and have developed a time-tested formula. And that it comes down to a few things. I'm going to mention a few key points. Number one, we can never do it alone. We may think we're self-created people, self-sufficient. I'm an entrepreneur. I can solve all problems. That works when things are going routinely and regularly. When something strikes us that's more powerful than us, the vital component is you have to hold on to something greater than yourself. Some people call it faith. Some people call it betach and trust. Some people call it connection. In the words of Rabbi Meir Meprimishlan, he said, when you're tied above, you don't fall below. In other words, we need something to hold on to. They say when the Blazhener Rebbe was in the concentration camps, he had with him a chassid. Some of his chassidim, his followers were there. This particular camp, every one of them had their own cruelty. The commandant in this camp had this game, this cruel, horrible game he would play, quote unquote. He would have the Jews dig these wide trenches. And then the game began with music playing and all that. Whoever can jump over the trench lives, whoever cannot will be shot. And one of the chassidim, one of the students of the Rebbe said to him, Rebbe, enough is enough. How much is unbearable? How much can we deal with, take? Let's just allow ourselves to die, go back to God, and that's that. And he said, no, as long as we have even our breath to breathe, we need to continue to fight to live. The game, quote unquote, began in the havoc and the mayhem. No one knew who lived, who didn't live. Well, the camps were liberated a little while later, and to their surprise, the chassid and the Rebbe meet elsewhere, some town, and they're shocked that they both made it. So the chassid says to his Rebbe, how did you jump over the trench? You're not a young man. How did you have the strength to jump? He says, I closed my eyes. I held on to the coattails, the kapota, the coattails of my holy father, my holy grandfather, my holy great-grandfather, my holy great-great-grandfather. And then he turns to his student, his disciple. He says, what about you? You're also not that young. How did you jump? He said, I held on to your coattails. So number one is that we must have somewhere we connect to a strength greater than ourselves. That's what happens during a storm. Which tree remains standing? The ones with deep roots that are connected to something more than they are. That's one. Number two, be around people who have that resilience. Remember, confidence breeds confidence. When you're around people who are all weak, it'll only weaken you. It's vital to have friends, a support system, and others that have either gone through the fire and become stronger, or generally have that optimistic approach. And finally, point number three, the last thing you want to do is isolate yourself and be ruminating and depressed over whatever tragedy happens, in this case, this tragedy. You need, as much as difficult as it may be, you need to pick yourself up and go help other people. The only way we do not allow emotions to destroy us is when we become proactive. You influence, then you don't allow those emotions to control you. I am brokenhearted as any one of you. Yet I've been trained that in a time like this is what we do. We come together, whether we're in the mood of it or not, and we strengthen each other. Do we have answers? No, we don't have answers to many things, but we still need to help each other. And when you help someone, even when you're in a broken heart and you're not in the mood of it, that itself brings light into your spirit and helps you get through the grief. Now, all these things are not that easy to do, but these are critical. These are three things that each one of us must do. It's the only way to get through times that are so difficult like we are experiencing now.
Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson. We just have another question. Someone here on the chat that would like to ask their question via video. Farideh, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, would you like to turn on your video? I can ask you to start your video now, or if you just want to ask by audio, just remember to please keep your questions succinct if you can. You know what? Maybe I'm asking you to start your video or to start your audio. I don't know if you should see a notification on your screen. Otherwise, we'll circle back. Okay. So another question is that there seems to be a gezerah. You know, this question actually came in via email as well. By a man named Yehuda, and he says, Bekitzer, like in short, he says that there seems to be this question that we can understand that Hashem perhaps had this divine decree and that these people were meant to pass away, and we can accept that. But why did Hashem have to carry out this decree in such a painful or horrific way? And couldn't they, someone else asked a similar question, couldn't they have passed on in their sleep, for example? So why did it have to come through in such a tragic, painful way?
Please don't take my smile as a smile. It's actually a cry. I don't have an answer to this question. And I don't even know if God will ever tell us why. Why do I say that? Is because this goes into the scope of what I mentioned earlier, an area about life that we just have to recognize that we know nothing about. It doesn't make any sense to me that, first of all, why do we need a decree like this in the first place? Didn't we have enough decrees over the last few thousand years? Didn't we have enough wake-up calls? So that's question number one. Question number two, why it should happen in this fashion. And I'm not trying to suggest that since it happened in the past, it makes this anyway easier. It just compounds the question. You know, when Eov, the great sufferer, Job, in the book of Eov, there's one verse that really always completely captures one's heart. When Eov says to God, why? Why are you allowing innocent people to suffer in such ways? And to paraphrase, Hashem answers, God answers, were you there when I created heaven and earth that you asked me this question? The way I always understood it was, you asked me why people suffered. You asked me why people have joy, why children are born healthy, why there's so much beauty in this world. In other words, this goes into the realm of the mysteries of God's existence. I have absolutely no understanding why any human being should have to suffer. You want to take somebody, God, let it be, like you said, peacefully in their sleep. Recently, a fellow came to see me. His father was suffering from Alzheimer's. Very good man. And he says, you know, I paid a lot of prices for my faith, but the Alzheimer's robbed my faith from me, because that I cannot understand. You want my father to die? Let him die. Why rip him away from his dignity? Why rip away his dignity, his self-respect, self-control over his own self? All I could do was hug him and say, I'm with you. I don't have an answer to such a question. I wouldn't even attempt an answer to such a question. Now, yes, can you start finding Kabbalistic, mystical? I hear when people start explaining things that it's a tikkun, a repair for a previous generation or a reincarnation of someone. I find those answers, first of all, how do you know? Did God tell you that that's his reasoning? Second of all, even if you think you know, is that that makes it better? So the point is, I don't have an answer to this question, especially in such a horrendous way. People crushed to death. I mean, it's like, who would even imagine such a thing? So I don't have an answer, but I do not believe the lack of an answer changes what we should be doing and how we should be motivated to continue to grow. And we just have to recognize there are areas in life that we simply have no answer for, and that should not weaken us. As a matter of fact, that itself, that acknowledgement to me is strength, not weakness. You know, in areas that we really don't have an answer, it's much healthier to acknowledge it than try to come up with some pat or cute answer. You know, would anyone going to a shiva call to a mother who lost her child here and say, hey, listen, I'd like to explain to you why this happened in such a horrific way? That just even saying that sounds so cruel. So, my friends, you know, I do not find the fact that we don't have an answer as a weakness. I find the fact that we are not God. And maybe it's very good that we're not God, because God has his own way of having to deal with all of this. And I'm sure, even though there's no anthropomorphism and we don't apply emotions to God, but we're also told that God suffers when we suffer. So I'm sure his suffering in many ways is even deeper than ours because he knows so much more than we do. So that's how I respond to this. And I'm sorry if I don't have anything more adequate to say.
It's very poignant. Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson. Now, this is a question from Golda, who says, given that both COVID and Meron affected such a cross-section of people, there seems to be a universal, in quotes, message here, right? That these two things are coming in close succession, somewhat close succession, and yet her question is, do you think that this same message do you think it is the same message, or it's something else?
Look, it's hard to ignore the juxtaposition after a year of COVID, and we're still not out of it completely. And people dying horribly. Remember a year ago, my own community and many communities, people I personally knew, family members and so on. And then this, literally in the footsteps. And like last year, if you remember, Meron was empty because of COVID. And now people could finally go in larger numbers, and look what happens. So it's hard to ignore the juxtaposition, but I also want to be careful not to equate tragedies. To tell someone, for example, hey, I'm saying it somewhat in a pat fashion, but you have a tragedy, don't be worried. Someone else also has a tragedy. I think you have to be careful not to take that type of tone. So I think every tragedy is its own story. From a point of view that I'm speaking to myself, which a lot of what I'm saying, just for the record, I speak to myself as I speak to you. I look at it like those of us that have lived through it and have witnessed it and have experienced it, and not necessarily close to home where you or I suffered directly. I had COVID last year, but pretty mildly. But all this we're not oblivious to. Our hearts are broken. We're grieving together with the parents and families of those that have died. And at the same time, looking at it all, I see it as a global and personal wake-up call. I will just speak for myself personally because I don't want to just turn this into an abstract idea. When COVID broke last year, right after Purim, basically March 2020, as I said, I had mild symptoms, but I immediately felt, and I say this with all humility, I felt I was trained for this moment. It's like a military. You train your whole life for the moment when you need to rise to the occasion. I saw immediately not only the illness, the pandemic, the virus, coronavirus, but also the psychological impact it was having. Tremendous, debilitating impact, especially as time passed and uncertainty settled in. When people's lives are disrupted in every possible way, from school to work, to travel, to leisure, to their entertainment, to their sport, whatever it may be, their entire lives were disrupted, everybody in their own way. Shuls were closed. Remember Pesach last year, 2020. So it had a tremendous psychological toll that's still there, because uncertainty does things to people that are very, very debilitating and equally challenging than the illness itself. So to me, it was very clear. This is the time to rise to the occasion, demonstrate what we were trained. We are the Jewish people. We've been through it all. We learned how to thrive through challenges, how to grow. And to me, in doing anything less would not be doing a justice to all our parents and grandparents who suffered so greatly for us to have free, prosperous lives today. So when I see this happening in the spirit and right in the footsteps, right, following or within COVID, to me, the wake-up call is now compounded exponentially so many times over. I honestly, I say it in a very sincere way. I think anything less than a global revolution, a global pandemic of goodness and kindness, anything less would not do justice, would not be acceptable. Things like this that happen, first on a COVID level, which was so global, and now this that drove so closely to home, requires us to create a revolution of good that's more powerful than the grief that we're experiencing now. Now, I know it sounds like strong words and very dramatic words, but I really firmly believe that. It's the only way. What Judaism has always taught has always been something negative happens, the positive has to be stronger, many times stronger than the negative. It's the only way to redeem a liability by turning it into an asset. Now, of course, this comes with grieving and it comes with sadness and comes with mourning. But at the end of the day, if we don't become stronger and better and more united and more loving, what does that say? That this event is going to be more powerful, this negative event, than the positivity that we're bringing into this world? To me, that is far greater tragedy. Not, don't get me wrong, it's not far greater tragedy than death and the loss of innocent people. But I mean a far greater tragedy in a cosmic sense, in a larger sense, because we have not taken it and turned it into something that will storm the heavens and earth itself into a major global revolution of goodness and kindness and unity and love. And this, all of us are responsible for. We can't be looking to others and saying, well, we're the leaders, where are the community leaders, where are the teachers, the rabbis, the scholars. No, this is a grassroots effort. We're all crying, so we all have to also learn how to turn this into a tremendous surge of goodness and not just rely. Just like the crying is collective, so too has to be this type of revolution. That's how I look at the whole picture.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Jacobson. As the evening is getting late, we just wanted to remind everyone of the tremendous power we have this evening as a gathering of souls, honoring those we've lost, and continuing to daven for those who are injured. So thank you so much, Rabbi Jacobson, for your time. And thank you to everyone for being here. And Rabbi Jacobson, if you would like to close with some final words, I'm sure we would all appreciate even perhaps a niggin, as you shared so powerfully that music can express so much more that our words cannot. So thank you. Thank you again, Rabbi Jacobson.
Sure. Well, I am personally overwhelmed by this evening. First of all, the turnout and the questions and just being together with you, even though this isn't person to person physically in one room, but I feel our hearts are one and our souls are one. And I want to say that I'm committed to continuing this type of journey with you. So I know I'm sure there are more questions and more things to share. So I see no reason, I'm just speaking out loud right now, I didn't even plan it, that maybe we should do a follow-up if people really want that. I'm happy to do it. I'm not happy to do it. I should say I am honored to do it. So that's on a practical level. On a deeper level, I want to reiterate and just sum up what I said. I believe that we have now, even though it came in the way that none of us wanted, a historic opportunity, which human nature is such that these moments dissipate. Let's be honest, human nature is time passes. The families will never forget, the families that have lost loved ones. But many of us will move on. And it would be a disgrace and a terrible if we did not solidify our commitments now and make sure we create permanent change. I can't tell you the secret formula to that. It's hard to do because as time passes and we don't have that same passion or the same even grief, what's driving us? That's why I believe when you make commitments right now and say, you know what, I'm going to make a commitment to do something new that I've never done before, initiate a new class, initiate maybe some effort of goodness, of chesed, of kindness. Use your minds, each one of us. Let us put our heads together. Maybe one of the resolutions from this come together is we'll create a forum. Let's suggest ideas. Suggest ideas that each one of you can submit. I will submit, we'll all submit, and let's turn it into a movement. And I'm open to hearing any idea and happy to join, participate. It doesn't have to be everything formal, it can be informal. But that to me is what I think is the most challenging thing. How do we turn this into something that's perpetual? That we can look back and say that 2021, Lag BaOmer, Tafshin Pei Aleph, Yes, it was a great tragedy happened. But a year or two later, Mashiach surely will come. But a year or two later, here are initiatives that grew out of that, and that we remember, look what happened. Here, look what great things people have done in that spirit that have lasted. So that's what I would suggest. Let's put our heads together in that context. And then finally, on a personal, emotional note, to me, all of this brings out a deep love for each one of you, deeper than ever. Obviously, a deep love to the families, though I don't know most of them. Some I know a little, some I know in passing through others. But a deep love, because at the end of the day, we're all neshamas. We're souls. Each of you, myself, every one of you, is a soul that God sent to this world. And most of it is 99% a mystery. Where is your soul before you came to this world? Where will it go in its future? It's a mystery. But we're here in this world, and we get sometimes so preoccupied and so consumed and overwhelmed by the material existence, by survival. And sometimes it's petty. Sometimes it's nonsense. Sometimes you look at things and say, what is that compared to matters of life and death like we're experiencing now? But then suddenly we're sent a wake-up call, something that shakes us up, a crack in the system, disrupts things, and it's meant to wake us up. And a wake up that you recognize, there's a deeper truths. You and I, each of us, is an ambassador that God sent to this world, ambassador of light, of love, of kindness. And that's why you're here. You're not here just to eat and sleep and make a lot of money and enjoy life. You're here to bring light to this world. God would not have taken your soul from such a beautiful Gan Eden and paradise and put it into such a harsh and cruel and hostile world if it weren't for a purpose that was greater than that beauty up in heaven. And what's that greatness? To take darkness and turn it to light. That is our mission. Each of us has to find a way to do it through our personal skills, whether it's communication skills, whether it's people skills, whether it's ideas, whether it's implementation, whether it's chesed. Each of us has a unique personality, and we have to learn how to be that unique ambassador of the light that you give off and transform the darkness of this world into light, into divine light. That is the most important message of all. So, as I began with a niggin, I'll conclude with a niggin. And you know what? I don't even want to call it a conclusion. Let's call it only a break between one farbrengen and the next. A small break, like they do by Hakafis. We say Ad Kan Hakafa Aleph. After the first dance, we say, okay, now the first dance is and the second dance will come. So we'll have second dance and the third dance. And we should only dance all the time. So let's sing another song. I'll sing a song which also evokes both the challenges of life and the hope and optimism of getting through darkness to a deeper place. So this song has 3 sections to it. It starts with a nostalgic section that remembers a better life, a peaceful life, a beautiful life, a joyous life. Then there's a second section that is somewhat melancholy, that talks about the challenges we all experience. And the third part of the song reminds us of the optimism, the hope, the trust, the betachan, that we will once again experience only joy. So in a way, it's like the beginning of history. Things began beautifully. Then there was the fall. Each of us in our own way, we lost our innocence. Tragedy happens, as has happened now. But we never lose sight of the destination, that we will march to Mashiach and to the Geula. We will march to a world where there'll be no more disease and illness and death. And we will be reunited with all those that have suffered and those have been taken from us prematurely. So the niggin is called Shamil. If you know it, you can sing it along wherever you may be. It goes like this. Oh, yanai, yanaro, Gundiri, yanai, yanai. Oh, yanai, yanai, oh, yano. Andiri, yanai, yanai, yanai. Anai, yanai, yanai. Oh, yanai, yano, yano. Yanai, yanai. Oh, yanai, yanai, yanai. Oh, yanaro, yano, yano. Narayanai, Ay Narayanai, Ay Narayanai, Naro. Narayanayano. Narayanai, Ay Narayanai. Ay Narayanai, Naro. Narayanai, Anayanai, Anayano. Ndiri yo yana yana yo yana yana anayana yano yano ndiri yo yana yana anayana yana yano. That's the nostalgia, remembering. Ndiri yana 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 oh yana oh yana yana yano. Diri yanai yanai yanai, I did it yanai, oh yanai yanai yano. Diri yanai yanai, I narai yanai, I narai yanai narum. The melancholy. Diri yanai 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 yano. I narai yanai, I narai yanai. Ay, narai, nay, naro, the hope and optimism. Diri yanai, 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 no. Thank you, everyone. On my behalf, thank you to our great moderator. Thank you for all of you with your questions. And please stay in touch. Any further questions, do not hesitate to write to us, to comment. And we'll try to plan, if need be, another connection like this. You want to conclude? Chaya bracha.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Jacobson. And we would just like to say that this itself is a form of healing, gathering, being strengthened by each other, with each other, and including positive resolutions moving forward. Thank you so much, Rabbi Jacobson. We'll be putting this on the Meaningful Life website. You will be able to catch this replay for those of you who weren't able to join from the beginning. Thank you again so much. And may the next time we all see each other be in person with Mashiach. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good evening. Thank you so much.
Everybody be consoled, and we should only celebrate good occasions together.